Happy New Year. I hope that January is treating all of you fairly. The weather is actually kind of ramping up a little bit here, and today I wanted to go through all 69 books that I read last year. I want to spiel about some of them. So without further ado, with a cup of tea to warm up my hands, because again, frigid here, let's go ahead and get started on all 69 books that I read in 2023. So book number one that I read was the third installment of the Shady Hollow series, which was Mirror Lake. This is an anthropomorphic cozy mystery, and if you don't know what qualifies as a cozy mystery, it is mystery with all of the good vibes. Yes, there is still murder. There's still everything that goes into making a murder mystery a murder mystery. Sit down with a cup of tea and a blanket and you can honestly get your murder mystery fix, but you can also enjoy the scenery, I guess, enjoy the characters, enjoy whatever the characters are doing in their day-to-day lives. They have businesses and careers. The second book I read last year is actually a reread of Beauty by Sherry S. Tepper, because Beauty is absolutely heart-wrenching. It's about the downfall of society and how there's literally no realistic magic in the world anymore. It's exactly how humanity is going at the moment, and it's a little bit synchronistic and scary. The next book that I read this year is also another reread, Gallant by V.E. Schwab. Haunted Estates. Okay. Everyone's heard me talk about this book. 5 stars. Next book that I read this year was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And then I watched the movie immediately after and liked the book better. The next book that I read is number 2 in the series of The Miniaturist, which is The House of Fortune by Jessie Burton. This is the continuation of, well, I can't tell you what happens. You have to read The Miniaturist, but this is the continuation. 5 stars. The next book that I read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I really wanted to try to get my classics pumped out last year early. I thought Victor was absolutely pretentious. Hated Victor. He needed to chill. He needed a chill pill for sure. Poor Frankenstein. Good for him. Okay, and then I read The Alchemist for the first time last year. The next story that I read is The Near Witch and also The Ashbourne Boy, which is kind of like back here in the back of the book. This is a reprint from V.E. Schwab's very first published story. It's about this town called Near, and there's lore about a witch who may or may not still be roaming the moors, and our main character essentially needs to stop her from killing all the children in the village. And The Ashbourne Boy is a character origin story for one of the main / supporting characters in The Near Witch. The next book that I read was an ebook, The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black, The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, a little blue book of fairy tales because I needed it for context for something that I just needed to document. I wouldn't even really count it. Star Daughter by Svedka Thorkar. Thursday Murder Club. I wanted to get the first one out of the way. If you like multiple POVs, then this book is for you, especially multiple POV geriatric murder mystery. There's that. The next book I read was The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. By the time I finished the book, I couldn't tell if they were actually crows or humans. I definitely focused more on the storyline and not really the why. The next book that I read is called The Book Jumper, and it's about this young teenage protagonist who, it has lots of depth, by the way. I loved the way that this book centered around the young protagonist living with her mother and also finding out, her other long-lost family. She has the ability to jump literally into books, into any story. She can go into any book that she lays over her face and jump into that world. But at the same time, in another pocket universe situation, there's a knight fighting off this big evil force, and I can't spill the beans. You just have to read it. It's nice. The next book that I read is The Priory of the Orange Tree. The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon was incredibly long, incredibly dense, and the world building was insane. Truthfully, I just didn't think that I had the capacity in my brain to remember everything that I needed to read. I'm gonna have to read it over and over. I'm gonna have to be infatuated with it, like The Lord of the Rings. That that's massive, and that you have to be a fan to dive in and really soak up what the author was trying to give you. The next book that I read is The Girl in the Thistles by S.K. Sandvig. I don't really remember what happened in the book. When I read ebooks, it's really hard for me to try to retain everything. I don't know why. Maybe it's the ritual of having a physical book and turning the pages. I don't know, like chewing gum before a test. I don't know. The next book that I read last year was Immortality by Dana Schwartz. Hazel, she has to go and medically take care of Princess Charlotte, I think her name is. It was everything that I hoped for. The ending aggravated me to no end. I really wanted Hazel to do the other thing. However, maybe we can pray for a third installment. Maybe we can hope for a trilogy. The next book that I read last year is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I needed it again for a little bit of context and source material for some something, but it's really cute, y'all. It's got all kinds of illustrations. Some of them are colored, some of them aren't. It differs a little bit from the original story, but not that much. It adds to it, if anything. And it was fun. It was a fun little break from reading serious books, I would say. Next book that I read last year is called The Bed of Eels by KJ Tiller. And to talk a little bit about this wonderful novel that I published last year, here is, well, me. In the grim dawn of 1930, Hazel Towers has spent her entire existence abandoned, ostracized, and confined in Lathina orphanage. She devises a plan to escape the village of Boar's Rest and every memory that has stained her. Just as she is to flee, a man arrives to adopt her, the first and only person to inquire. She has no choice but to accompany him soon before her 16th birthday, forcing her to live with decisions that are still not hers. She always desired to have a family, but her future is permanently altered when she arrives at the nefarious Feller farm. As she meets Jonah, her new father and widowed apiarist, she immediately realizes something is horrifically wrong. As Hazel becomes gravely ill, Jonah becomes increasingly suspicious of her plans to flee, but there is something darker and more sinister about his ambitions. Hazel begins to unravel the dreadful secrets of her new father and his past, but as danger escalates, she fears not only for her own life, but the lives at Lathina orphanage. Can Hazel escape with her life intact in a place where horror is no longer nightbound and no one is who they seem? The next book I read is called The Master and Margarita. I don't really have much to say about this book. It kind of felt like a blur when I was reading it as well. There was just so much that happened. The next book that I read is called An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helen Turnston. I have cracked into a genre of geriatric murder. It's so good. This old lady has all the audacity in the world to do whatever she wants and justify it. It's hilarious. It's a collection of short stories about this little old lady who lives alone and she holds it down. The next book that I read was The Fall of the House of Usher and Other Writings. Go read Ligia. In my opinion, I think it's the best short story I've ever read from Edgar Allan Poe. The next book that I read is actually part of a series. Last summer as well, I got super into watching The Black Cauldron. I don't know how many times I replayed it because it's so elusive. The Black Cauldron movie that we all grew up watching isn't actually the original. See, what they did was they made a whole movie. Disney made a whole movie with very minimal employees. They only had like 3 people to do most of it, I think. The big guys, you know, in the box, they said, this is way too scary. This is way too scary for children. It's a Disney movie. What are y'all doing? Handed it off to someone else. They redid the entire movie. 95% of the movie was redone because apparently it was too scary initially. I really needed source material, so I picked up Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. If you like Lord of the Rings, you're gonna like this. The next book that I read was The Yellow Wallpaper and Other Selected Writings. The next book I listened to on audiobook was Pearl by Josh Malerman. I listened to it in 8 hours. I crocheted the entire day. The audacity of this literal pig who is sentient. Wow. A murderous, sentient pig. It's a good story. The next book that I read last summer was The Late Mrs. Willoughby by Claudia Gray. Sorry if my eyes are watery. I just got done coughing up a lung. The next book is In the House in the Dark of the Woods by Laird Hunt. I'm super into 1600s at the moment. It reads like a fever dream and you feel yourself kind of just, you're sliding down the slope, but comfortably, and you know that things are going really wrong, but it puts it in kind of a like psychotic break. If you like books that have an unreliable narrator, then you should definitely pick up this book. The next book that I read was A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This was my first book I ever read by T. Kingfisher. The next book that I read is All the Blood We Share by Camilla Bruce. It's about the Bender family, real family. This is like taken from real life, but also speculative scope into the Bender family and their lives in Kansas. The next book that I read is Of Bees and Mist by Eric Szechuan. I've talked about this a lot on my channel. It follows around family drama, in-laws, marital problems, children. It's heavily centered around loss while also still having, if that makes sense. If you've read it, let me know if that made sense. The next book that I read is Deep and Dark and Dangerous by Mary Downing Hahn. I really like that Mary Downing Hahn gives the responsibility of maturity while reading to the main character because she doesn't breeze over anything and she doesn't over-explain too much. The next book is also by Camilla Bruce. It's In the Garden of Spite. The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. It's about this woman who has to go to late husband's estate and take care of things. There's like these evil wooden cutout people. This girl goes through it. She's terrorized. This is one of the books where there's such a huge buildup for like 97% of the book, and then the ending gives everything, and it's like, oh, you son of a bitch. bitch. The next book that I read was Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. The next book is Feed by M.T. Anderson. You're gonna hate the main characters, you're gonna hate everything about it, but you're supposed to. But this focuses on the either very far or very near future thing that they put in your heads, and all of a sudden you have a feed. There's social media in your eyes, like in your vision. No one else can see it but you. And that's basically the human race at that point. The next book is A Potion to Die For. This is #1 in a cozy mystery series by Heather Blake. The next book that I read was Bones and All by Camilla DeAngelis, and I watched the movie first. However, I knew there would have been more to Marin in the book. It's about love and loss and human nature, animalistic nature. The main character is going through so much, and yet she just doesn't have the time to sit down and unpack it. And so while I let that one simmer in your head for a minute, I'm gonna go take a break, and how about a little self-promoted commercial?
What makes a woman love? Hang her weary head and cry. What makes a woman hang her weary head and cry?
And the next book that I read was I Can Be a Better You by Taryn Fisher, which was probably one of the most outrageous. Bless you. She wants to basically have the life of someone who is the mother of this little girl who looks like a daughter that she just outright wants. It's a book about socio and psychopaths, essentially, and a woman who is caught up in between the two of them. The next 5 books that I read were by Paulo Coelho because I wanted to do like a little experiment. If you are looking for my opinions about those, go to that video and watch it. It's a lot to talk about all over again, but the first one was 11 minutes, and then Veronica Decides to Die, and then The Spy, then The Archer, and I also reread The Alchemist again, considering it was part of the library books that I got. The next book is called Call Me By Your Name by Andre Ackerman, and it was a movie as well, starring Timothée Chalamet and Armie Hammer, a boy who falls in love with a grown man who is staying at his summer home. The next book that I read is Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. It is an absolutely amazing 5-star read. The next book that I read, Jinxed by Carol Higgins Clark. This actually had a totally different dust jacket on it. Got this from a box, first of all, from my grandma's garage. She was gonna give them away. So it's basically like a real life Shady Hollow. I enjoyed it. The next book that I read was In the Company of Witches by Orly Wallace. This one is essentially like another way to read practical magic. It's really fun. The next book that I read is An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed by Helen Thurston, and it is kind of just like a continuation. The next book that I read was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I mean, I'll never get over this movie or this book. I hope I reread it soon. The next book that I read was The Gates by John Connolly. It's about this boy who essentially witnesses the gates of hell opening, and he tries to stop it. The next book that I read is The Bonesetter's Daughter by Amy Tan. I actually have the dust jacket out in my writer's shed, but I don't remember a whole lot about this book. It's just about uncovering family secrets. The next book that I read was Dracula by Bram Stoker. I wanted to bust out some more classic lit books. I actually like the ending in the book more than the movie. The next book was The Crucible by Arthur Miller. I have a physical copy here somewhere. If you've ever seen the movie The Crucible, it's that. The next book that I got was actually in a conglomerate, if that's the word I'm looking for, of vintage books that I found at a thrift store. I read book number 6 from the Dana Girls Mystery Series. This specific book was printed in 1937. These books are a product of their time. The next book that I read was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I also read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I wanted to knock these two out this year. I read Jane Eyre when I was 14, I believe, and I just read Wuthering Heights last year, and I am 100% obsessed with Wuthering Heights. I love Jane Eyre to death. It just cuts deeper. The relationship dynamics between everybody is so, absolutely so tense. It's tense in Jane Eyre, but these are both very intense books. The next book that I read last year was Slewfoot by Brom. I absolutely fell in love with this novel, but essentially this girl, it has had enough of the Puritan lifestyle. An amazing author, also an amazing artist. The next book that I read was Sing Down the Moon by Scott Odell. The next book was The Little Prince. I figured it was time to read it. I loved it. It was adorable. Again, really sad. The next book that I read was Abigail by Magda Sosbo, and it was a translated book. But it's about this girl who, during World War II, has to go and stay at a boarding school, and the boarding school is awful. The next book was really screwed up, you guys. It was pretty messed up. It's The Vegetarian by Hong Kang. Trigger warning right now. I'm putting all the trigger warnings in. The next book is The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. I wanted to give this a reread for the heck of it. The next book that I read is The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. Super interesting, really sad. The next book that I read was Wait Till Helen Comes by Mary Downing Hahn, another fun read. The next book that I read was The Girl in the Locked Room by Mary Downing Hahn. The next book that I read isn't actually a book, it's The Rape of Lucrece by William Shakespeare. And I needed it for source material, and it's harrowing. And then the very last book, I spent the entire year reading this, Notwithstanding by Luis de Bernieres. It's a short story collection about this little village. If you have ever wanted Roald Dahl and Wes Anderson mixed together, then you have got to go and pick up Notwithstanding. I wouldn't say that it's slice of life, because what happens at the end of every short story is so dark that it's like, wait a minute, is this a cozy book? I'm not sure anymore. It's very sad at the end of every short story. So I think that is all of the books that I read this year. I am still flustered as to where my copy of The Crucible went. That is it. Thank you so much for sitting here with me while I talk about, ramble about, try to get through summarizing all 69 books that I read last year. It is such a goal that I never thought I would achieve. I never thought I would read that many books in a year. Stay tuned for more book and sewing videos, perhaps. I guess I'm throwing those in there now randomly. And don't forget to check out the Bed of Eels on Amazon. I will see you guys in the next video.